We begin, and a very, very good afternoon to everyone here. It is my privilege to welcome you all to today's webinar on the potential role of hydrogen in India, harnessing the hype. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, Government of India, Lord Adair Turner, Co-Chair Energy Transitions Commission, as well as a mentor to several colleagues at TERI, it is indeed an honor to have you with us today. All the esteemed speakers of the panel discussion, as well as the participants that have joined both on WebEx platform and on YouTube, a very warm welcome to you too. Ladies and gentlemen, TERI colleagues for the past year have been interacting intensively with potential users of hydrogen, including the power sector, the transport sector, and the industry per se. We have also been assessing the price competitiveness of hydrogen in these applications, as well as the cost of production for green hydrogen. We are bringing together these findings in a detailed report, which will be launched shortly as part of TERI's pre-event of the World Sustainable Development Summit. As you may be aware, that the WSDS is TERI's flagship event and has been held annually since 2001. And the next summit will be held from February 10th to the 12th, 2021. Do add these dates to your calendar, and the updates on the summit program will be available on the WSDS website. I welcome you all again, and with no further ado, I invite Mr. Thomas Spencer, fellow TERI, who is also the co-author of the report, to set the stage for today's event. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Annapurna. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I hope that it is visible okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so good afternoon to all the friends and colleagues who have joined, either via the WebEx or the YouTube link. Thank you very much for joining us here. So I will just briefly go through the key findings of the report that has been authored by the team that you can see here, and then we can jump into the discussion. I only have about 8 slides. The report itself is more than 120 pages. There's a lot of analysis there. So I would encourage you to take a look at it after the event. It will be up on our website. So the first key message that we want to make is that in comparison to other periods in energy history, for example, in the early 2000s, where there was a certain hype around hydrogen, this time it seems to be different. We see a virtuous circle emerging for the final penetration of hydrogen as a major player in the energy system globally. And this virtuous circle is composed of 3 elements. Firstly, we see falling costs for green hydrogen, which we expect to fall by about 50% by 2030 and about 85% by 2050. Bringing green hydrogen into a possibility to be competitive with grey hydrogen produced from fossil fuels. And with these very low costs of hydrogen, that also opens up the possibility for hydrogen to become competitive as a fuel in end-use sectors. The second component of the virtuous circle is increasing demand. So when companies start to see a potential for there to be a demand for their product, they invest in supply, and that also helps to bring down the costs. And what we can see is that there are a number of sectors, particularly in the industry sector, where there is a lot of interest now about using hydrogen as a fuel and as a chemical feedstock. And the third element of this virtuous circle is strengthening policy globally. So here I've put a map of the countries around the world currently having some form of hydrogen strategy. You can see all of the major players are there. A lot of countries have announced very ambitious targets for scaling up electrolyzers for the production of hydrogen from renewable electricity, putting in place targets for the use of hydrogen in various end-use sectors. And that strengthening policy drive is understanding that to decarbonize the energy system, we need low carbon energy carriers of a chemical nature like hydrogen. And that strengthening policy cycle will also help to drive increasing demand and falling costs. And so we enter into a virtuous circle for this technology. Second key message coming out of our analysis is that we project that by 2050, the demand for hydrogen in India, which currently sits at about 6 million tons, would increase roughly fivefold in a scenario where there's robust policy for the use of hydrogen across the energy sector. Even in a scenario where the penetration of hydrogen is driven only by economic fundamentals and the accompanying policy, for example, deploying infrastructure to make hydrogen attractive in certain sectors, even in a baseline scenario where we don't have this kind of strong policy, we see hydrogen demand growing threefold. And that provides very interesting new business opportunities for companies operating in both the supply and demand side. I'd also draw your attention to the sectors that we see as the key ones for driving hydrogen demand. We actually see it principally being used in industry, particularly initially in ammonia and refining. And then with stronger policy also in the steel sector. We expect that hydrogen for steel production will be competitive by the early 2030s, but it's such a big sector that it will also require some enabling infrastructure and policies for hydrogen steel to really take off. We see a role for hydrogen in transport, and I'll discuss this a little bit more. But this is a transition that is also quite policy dependent because it is so infrastructure dependent. And that's why the hydrogen demand for transport is so much higher in the low carbon scenario than in the baseline scenario. And we see a little bit of hydrogen in the power sector. I'll explain in a little moment why we see so little. Third key message is that by 2030, we see the costs of green hydrogen produced from renewables falling by more than 50%, and it will start to compete with hydrogen from fossil fuels. So this is our projection with obviously a range because there is uncertainty here for hydrogen produced from grid electricity, from off-grid solar. So this is where there is a direct PPA with the solar production facility, from natural gas and from coal. And you can see that even by 2030, hydrogen produced from off-grid solar is starting to become competitive with the range of natural gas. And by 2050, there is daylight between the two. Off-grid solar is by far the most competitive way of producing hydrogen in India. The fourth key message that we really want to stress is that hydrogen is not always the most efficient option, and its use should be reserved for cases where no alternatives exist. So on the slides, you can see the lifetime conversion efficiency of fuel cell electric vehicles on the left and battery electric vehicles on the right. The input fuel for both is ultimately electricity, assuming that we are producing hydrogen from electricity. But because producing hydrogen from electricity is so energy intensive, the conversion efficiency is only about 70%. A lot of the energy across the value chain from electricity ultimately to motive energy in the vehicle is lost in the case of fuel cell electric vehicles. Whereas in the case of battery electric vehicles, a lot more of the ultimate input energy is retained and provides ultimate energy service in the form of motive power. And this is a key finding, not just for the transport sector, but for example, also for the power sector. So if we are using hydrogen as a storage vector in power, converting surplus electricity into hydrogen, storing that hydrogen, and then reconverting that hydrogen back into electricity, that's quite an inefficient process. It has a conversion efficiency today across the whole cycle of about 33%. That might rise to about 50% with technology improvements in the coming decades, but it's still quite inefficient. So a key message that we really stress across the whole report is direct electrification tends to be far more efficient than hydrogen as a fuel. And so we should reserve hydrogen for sectors where direct electrification is not really possible, either because you need a dense energy carrier, because you need high-grade process heat, or because you need the hydrogen as a feedstock. So one of these sectors that we see as very attractive is the ammonia sector. India produces a lot of ammonia for fertilizer. And we see by 2030 that hydrogen produced from solar, with some underground storage of hydrogen in order to enable a round-the-clock supply of hydrogen to the ammonia facility, could be very competitive with the current range of ammonia produced from hydrogen from natural gas. And the range that we have indicated in those dotted red lines is for natural gas at $11 per MMBTU and natural gas at $7 per MMBTU. So even by 2030, green hydrogen produced from solar electricity is very competitive with this range, and that will only widen in the decades after 2030. In the steel sector, we also see hydrogen as a key decarbonization, and I showed that with the sector-wise demands that we see for hydrogen. So on this graph, we've put sort of two of the possible routes for reaching net zero emissions from the steel sector in India by 20. Bottom, you have the CCS route with the intermediate technology like the smelting reduction process of Haisana technology, then moving into carbon capture and storage of some of the process emissions, and finally reaching net zero or close to zero by increasing capture rates to almost 90%. The top one is the hydrogen route, and this is where you would start to blend hydrogen with natural gas and existing natural gas-based direct reduced iron facilities. And by the 2030s, 2040s, shift to using 100% hydrogen as the fuel and reducing agent. And I would say that 10 years ago, the technology paradigm for decarbonizing the steel sector was the bottom one. I think we have shifted quite decisively towards and our analysis for the steel sector shows that this can be a quite attractive route for India, given the fact that we already have quite a lot of direct reduced iron, so we can start to blend already in that, and also that hydrogen becomes so cheap and natural gas is relatively expensive in India. So this looks like a very attractive route for a pathway for the steel sector out towards net zero emissions by 2060 or thereabouts. Now, coming to the transport sector, we have built a model which looks at the economic competitiveness of hydrogen as a fuel in different transport segments. And the main conclusion is that for everything but heavy-duty, long-distance trucking, battery electric vehicles win hands down. There is no case for hydrogen, for example, in passenger four-wheelers or even in city buses. Battery electric vehicles are just a much more attractive technology. On the other hand, in heavy-duty trucking, when you take into account the weight penalty of the battery, as we have done in our modeling, and for longer routes, so these are routes above 600, 700 kilometers per day, then hydrogen vehicles could be competitive by the 2030s, 2040s with the dominant internal combustion engine from diesel technology. But we also find that battery electric vehicles could be competitive with both fossil fuel and hydrogen vehicles, particularly for shorter duty cycles, for example, 500, 400 kilometers or intercity heavy duty like refuse collection. So we really see a mixed technology paradigm, even in the heavy duty transport sector. Some hydrogen maybe for longer distances, above 700, 800 kilometers, but battery electric is also very attractive. Calculated in our model the per kilometer CO2 emissions for a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle, that's the blue line, versus a petrol diesel vehicle, that's the black line. And this is assuming that the hydrogen is produced from grid electricity and that the grid really decarbonizes between now and 2050. And you merge over time, you really need very low carbon electricity for fuel cell electric vehicles to be basis with diesel vehicles. So this is essentially because, as I mentioned previously, the conversion efficiency of the whole process is not efficient. You're losing a lot of energy across the process. So the key message here is that if you want there to be net emissions reductions from the incumbent fossil fuel technology, you either need to decarbonize the grid very rapidly, or you need to source the electricity for producing hydrogen directly from zero carbon sources like renewables. Now turning to the power sector, we've studied the power sector in quite some detail in this report. In particular, we've studied under what conditions you would need power to hydrogen to power as a storage vector in the power system. And so what we have done here is we've built a model that simulates the hourly operation of the power system for every hour of the year. And then we have progressively run that model with higher and higher shares of renewable energy, reaching 100% in the final scenario. And we have looked at the output of that model in terms of when does the model start to build power to hydrogen to power as a storage technology. So the graph on the left shows the total amount of electricity demand that is being met out of storage, with battery storage being blue and hydrogen storage being in red. And you can see that the model only builds hydrogen storage once we get up to very high penetrations of renewable. And this is consistent with what we see in other modeling exercises. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, India's main renewables resource is solar, and solar needs intraday storage. So shifting electricity from production at midday to demand at night, for example. And hydrogen power is not competitive with that. Lithium-ion batteries win hands down. And the other reason that we don't see it until higher penetrations is that the use case for hydrogen power that is attractive is as seasonal storage. So this is shifting energy across seasons from high monsoon wind output to winter, for example. And basically hydrogen power is not competitive with conventional generators until you reach very high penetrations of wind and solar, in which case there aren't any conventional generators anymore that can do this kind of seasonal balancing of renewables. So this is a key conclusion that we come to, that hydrogen power is a crucial part of a very low carbon power system, but we probably don't need it too much in the short term. And the graph on the right shows why this is. We also compute in the model the total system cost, so in rupees per megawatt hour, much as to produce electricity for the entire Indian economy. That's it, that rises quite dramatically as you drive more and more renewables into the electricity system. But once you have technology costs, as we are projecting for 2050, even 100% renewables power generation system can be competitive with the current cost of about 4.5 megawatt hour of generation. And the increase as you drive the share of renewables up is essentially because the model has to start installing expensive options like hydrogen power. So the more we can delay that option and the more we can use it only to squeeze the last, say, 15 or 10% of conventional generation out of the system as we transition to a very high renewable system, the lower we can keep the costs. Okay, last slide, I think. We've also calculated electricity demand for all sectors out to 2050. In the baseline scenario, this reaches about 5,500 terawatt hours. In the low carbon scenario, we assume much stronger efforts on energy efficiency, which helps to keep demand down, but we also assume much stronger electrification of sectors like transport, but also much wider use of hydrogen across the economy. And that means that you need a lot of electricity to produce green hydrogen. So we estimate by 2050, you could be looking at about 1,000 terawatt hours of electricity being dedicated to producing green hydrogen. This compares with total generation today of 1,600 terawatt hours, so it's a substantial amount. And obviously, this creates extra stress on the decarbonization of the electricity system because you have to find another 1,000 terawatt hours of zero carbon electricity supply in the context of an electricity system that is already growing quickly. And this underscores the message that I mentioned earlier. Because green hydrogen is an energy-intensive process, and because the power system is already under some stress to decarbonize by 2050 because demand is growing so quickly, you have to look at using hydrogen efficiently. And that means, as I mentioned, direct electrification wherever possible, and hydrogen only wherever necessary. Second last slide. We've also looked at the use of hydrogen in industrial clusters across India. We've built a very sophisticated model that models the a full every hour of the year, and tries to deliver a constant supply of low-cost hydrogen to an industrial facility. And we find that even when we have such a stringent modeling setup, you have to deliver constant hydrogen supply for every hour of the year from variable renewables, you can still get low delivered costs by 2030 in the case of Gujarat. $1.78 per kg is a fantastically low cost for hydrogen. The way that the model does this is it mainly accesses direct PPAs for renewables. It doesn't source grid power because grid power is too expensive. It curtails a lot of renewables, and it also builds hydrogen storage, not battery storage. And the model prefers to build hydrogen, underground hydrogen supercharging battery storage. So these are the kind of parameters that would allow us to deliver a constant supply of hydrogen to an industrial facility in Gujarat at a very low delivered cost. Okay, key conclusions. The hydrogen hype is real. By 2030, we expect low-cost green hydrogen to be competitive with other sources of hydrogen production, but also with other fuels in certain key end uses. But hydrogen is not a panacea. It is not a silver bullet for the entire energy system. It is part of a broader decarbonization strategy, and we have to use it strategically because producing green hydrogen is an energy-intensive process. So we list some policy efforts that will be required. We need more R&D. More research, for example, mapping storage to underground hydrogen storage options to the location of industrial facilities in India. We need, in the next 5 years, demonstration and commercialization in key sectors. We need to look at infrastructure and incentives. We need to think carefully about how we optimize deployment of hydrogen from a system-wide perspective, not just from the perspective of individual sectors. And we need to look at international partnerships and funding. For example, international funding for setting up demonstration projects could be something that we could look at in the next few years. I'll stop there, Dr. Annapurna, back to you.
Well, with that, I want to thank Thomas and the entire team, Thomas, Will, Spencer, Shruti Dayal, and Ranjit for putting this work together. I think that looking at it from the point of view of demand is where the game is. We've had discussions around hydrogen for a very long time, but all of them have been supply-based. What we tried to do was to look at where will the demands come from, what are the kinds of prices at which demand would become cost effective in those other sectors. And what that provides us is a stepwise ladder, a descending ladder in which prices decrease, new markets open up, prices decrease further, more new markets open up, and so on, till we come to the magic price of $2 per kg, which is where hydrogen made from methane and used in the ammonia and the fertilizer sectors is today. This is work that we've been carrying out under our ETC, the Energy Transitions Commission program, and I'm delighted that Adair is with us. He is the chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, and we'll hear from him in a little while. We also have, as Thomas mentioned, done a huge amount of modeling of the power system in the years ahead. As he alluded to, this is an hour-by-hour modeling for the 8,760 hours of a year, because one of the things that we notice is it's not just the demand that increases, it's the shape of the demand curve, the load curve that changes year on year. And I think the messages that Thomas presented in his last slide are those that we would like you to think about as we go ahead. But the central point that we want to leave you with is that hydrogen has the potential to play a major role in a number of sectors across the economy. And the kind of holistic assessment that the NITI Aayog is doing is obviously something that I think is extremely important as we look at investments in the case of hydrogen. And I'm absolutely delighted that Dr. Rajiv Kumar the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, will be honoring us by releasing the report and then sharing his thoughts with us. We see that not only does hydrogen have an impact today, but investments, particularly in things like electrolyzers, could have ripple effects also in terms of exports. And I think that's one of the advantages that we should keep in mind as we move ahead. The short point that I'd like to leave us all with is there is an opportunity to grow the hydrogen sector into an economically competitive sector. It will enable economic growth, it will enable job growth, it will enable globally competitive growth, and also enable a carbon emissions free future. Because our analysis suggests is that renewables, batteries, and hydrogen, together with some biomass-based fuels, is the energy mix, the most cost-effective energy mix for India in the future, and especially so when countries across the world decarbonize as well. It is with great pleasure now that I request Dr. Rajiv Kumar to release the report and then to share his thoughts with us. Dr. Rajiv Kumar.
I hope all of you, I hope you will join me in releasing this.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Absolutely wonderful.
Round of applause.
Sir, can I also request the authors to put their cameras on? Thomas, Will, Ranjit, Shruti, and if the IT cell could take a photograph.
We need them to hold up the report if they are proud of it.
Yes, absolutely. Will, Thomas.
Well,
if not, then Dr. Rajiv Kumar, can I request you to share your thoughts on how we go ahead with the hydrogen economy?
Thank you, Lord Turner, the chair of Energy Transition Commission, my friend Dr. Ajay Mathur, Thomas Spencer, Dr. Nipurna, the other authors of this report, ladies and gentlemen. An absolute pleasure to be here at the launch of this very incisive and very useful, insightful report by TERI. One has come to expect nothing else, nothing less from an organization like this, and I want to congratulate the team. Heartiest congratulations of producing something that will contribute to policy making in here, in Niti Aayog and in the Government of India. On the behalf of Government of India, I want to assure you that this report and its recommendations, and thank you for the very lucid presentation, Thomas. Your recommendations will receive all the due consideration that it deserves. I must confess, however, that I felt a little little bit of a cold water being dropped on us, because I was indeed caught in the big hype of a shift to the hydrogen economy. I thought we are on the cusp of a major energy transformation like the one that we've had in the past, which have changed civilizations. You know, when you shifted from human motive power to steam and to electricity and so on, I had begun to think in the consultation that we've had in Niti Aayog, that hydrogen is going to offer us a huge transition to the cleanest fuel from the most abundant resource and with very high energy density. But your very well taken caution that it is not a panacea, and that although the hype is real, but we need to be careful. We can't assume that hydrogen will replace the energy sources, the fossil fuel, and the rest, even by 2050, and it'll have a sort of reasonably small share of the total energy mix. I think, as I said, a reasonable caution. I, being a inveterate optimist, feel that for the Indian situation, your estimates of the improvement in technology and the decline in prices will prove to be rather cautious, and that we will see a much rapid decline in prices and a much better and much faster improvements in technology, especially the electrolyzer technology, because that is where I think the Indian future lies, because converting naphtha or gas or other hydrocarbons into hydrogen is not really the way forward for India, simply because we import this stuff, and that, therefore the costs remain quite high for us. So it is the green hydrogen which is the way forward for us, and therefore I'm hoping that not only being in the position that I am, I'm not only hoping, but I'm going to be trying and giving it as much of a push as I can for these technologies to make more rapid strides than what are assumed in your report for the moment. And I think I'm thrilled to see that already by 2030, in your scenario two, you reach $2 per kilogram of hydrogen. I was myself not so optimistic, but thanks for pointing us in that direction. I was hoping that we'll reach about 2.5, and then there itself, because of a very cheap renewable power in our country. The latest bids that we have, Minister R.K. Singh informed us the other time when we had this meeting on hydrogen just a couple of weeks ago, that the latest bids were rupees 2 per kilowatt hour per unit, not without storage, and about rupees 4 with storage, and declining, mind you. So therefore, I think with those costs of renewable power, yes, of course, albeit they are from solar principally, which is not as stable a source as others, but with storage, and storage technology is now coming very rapidly, evolving very rapidly. I think the days of 24/7 renewable power from solar are not too far away, because we can stabilize the solar energy supplies, and so therefore all of this, by way of saying that in the government of India, for our very known reasons and for very good all the factors, we see hydrogen as our next big sunrise sector, and we see hydrogen and the transition to the hydrogen economy as the way forward for India. And therefore, I hope that some of my optimism will prevail, in combination, of course, with hopefully a coordinated policy thrust from us, and working with with think tanks like TERI, the Clean Energy, Change of Energy Transition Commission, and other international partners. We would like to achieve that. The report points out that we already use about 6 million tons of hydrogen principally in ammonia and refineries, and which is about 8.5% of the global demand. And the report says that this will rise fivefold, and in a cheap and a good scenario, sevenfold by 2050. I think we will be surprised, and I think the demand in sectors like steel, where there will be tremendous pressure for decarbonizing the steel production, and where India's production of steel is going to rise quite significantly in the coming years, because our per capita consumption of steel is abysmally low. So therefore, I think we should be prepared, in my view, for a much bigger expansion in hydrogen production, and all the infrastructure that is needed and the capacities that are needed, and the system of hydrogen production I think we should be preparing for that at this point of time. The other day when the webinar, it came out quite clearly that even if we are going to use it in transport only in long distance heavy duty trucks, we would better off having a decentralized system of hydrogen production rather than a centralized production and then transporting hydrogen through all the all the cryogenic checks, etc. Now, how will that decentralized production system of hydrogen work is something that we need to get onto the drawing board and figure out as to what are the technology that will enable us to do that. And this has to be combined, necessarily with the hydrogen being produced through clean power, through solar power, or through or through what other renewable power. And I think to that extent, very sort of relatively large solar power generating stations, which combine or which are used to produce hydrogen through the electrolysis method, should be envisaged going forward. So I think I would encourage TERI and all others who are here to really focus on the fuel cell technology, and I think that's where, as I said, the future lies. It's not 2006 onwards. The Department for Renewable Energies has already started working on the fuel cell and hydrogen technology. In 2018, Tata, in collaboration with ISRO and Indian Oil Corporation, put a truck on the road with fuel cell. NTPC is committed to having the pilot bus traveling from Delhi to Agra by the end of 2021. I know that Hyundai has promised to bring on SUV, a fuel cell powered SUV on the Indian road in 2021, and we know that Tokyo Olympics would be the showcase for Toyota to display its own fuel cell technology. So I'm saying all of this to say that this is the time for India to focus on that, because, as I said, and as I think Ajay said, if we make the right breakthrough here, this is going to be the biggest opportunity for India for using its, for ramping up its production of clean energy, for meeting and going ahead of its Paris commitments, for retaining its status as a potential 2-degree centigrade economy, and for its vast engineering and software skills that we have here. And I think this could give a fillip to the Indian industry, like perhaps came from rarely other sources. And this is why I would urge my own colleagues in the Niti Aayog to think of putting electrolyzers within the production-linked incentive scheme. Because there are 13 sectors there. I would like this to be the 14th, because and PV cells I know are there, and so are advanced chemistry cells. I would like this to be put there as well, so that to give it the fiscal incentive to take forward, the breakthroughs or the innovations that are required to make this technology as rapidly as we can. I think Ajay knows that we are in Niti Aayog. We are committed to this. We have had 2 very good brainstorming sessions in the past few months. The last one was very well attended, and we have agreed to a kind of a time-bound program to take this forward. The Prime Minister's office has already proposed a high-level committee, an interministerial high-level committee, to look at the prospects, potential, and problems and issues of the hydrogen economy. It probably will be anchored at Niti Aayog. And so therefore, all of this to say that the government of India is fully cognizant of the potential that this possible transition has for the country. And we will do whatever is in our power to give it the required push, and also to ensure that we act very consciously in partnership with the private sector and with the academia and with our international partners. And so therefore I really welcome any such offers and initiatives that would come our way to create such partnerships as we go forward. Friends, let me once again and finally sincerely congratulate TERI and the team of authors for having put together a very insightful, incisive analysis, which has, as you can see, provoked my thinking into emphasizing my own optimism. And therefore, I hope and I look forward to further such work together because of the models that you've created. We have our own energy vertical here. We look forward to working together and taking this transition forward as rapidly and as surely as we can. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. This is music to our ears, obviously. The centrality of hydrogen to the energy picture of the future. And may I add that actually the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, or its predecessors, whatever they were called, in 1987, I got my first project from MNRE on fuel cells. So they've been at it for a long time. But now let me turn to Lord Adair Turner, the chairman of the Energy Transitions Commission, amongst other things, and I request him to share his thoughts on hydrogen and the global picture that they see. Adair, all yours. Adair, I think you're muted.
I think that's fine now. Ajay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be joining you and Dr. Kumar and the other guests for this session on this hydrogen report, and a great pleasure to be joining in launching this report, which is another excellent report from the TERI and ETC India team. As I think most people listening know, the Energy Transitions Commission is a global coalition of companies and environmental NGOs, about 35 of the former, 10 of the latter, really from across the whole world, from Europe, from China, increasingly from the US and Australia, and in India. Our Indian members include companies like Dalmia in cement, Tata in steel, Renew Power in the power sector. And we are united in believing that the world has to deal with climate change, has to at very least meet the Paris climate commitment of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade, and ideally limiting it to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that to do that, we have to get the whole global economy to about net zero emissions by mid-century, with the aim being that all developed countries should get there by 2050, and we would say all developing by 2060 at the latest. The good news is that since we started working 5 years ago, and of course my co-chair is Ajay, and we've been working together on this for 5 years now, since we started working 5 years ago, it has become much more possible, much more credible to believe that we can get to that mid-century zero carbon economy. And the fundamental reason why that's become much more credible is the remarkable collapse in the price of renewable electricity, wind and solar and batteries and other related technologies, which enable us to imagine the complete decarbonization of the power system faster and cheaper than we dared hope even 5 years ago, let alone 10. And you saw earlier in Thomas's presentation some of those charts on the total system cost of systems at different levels of penetrations of renewables. We're at least up to 60 and to 80% by 2050. They will be cheaper ways of producing electricity than the way that we do it from fossil fuels at the moment. Sorry, my burglar alarms has gone off. I hope somebody's going to switch it off. But yeah, if I have to go and divert, please do excuse me. We now have a vision of how to deliver zero carbon electricity in a competitive fashion. But one also, that enables us then to set out to build sorry, I am going to have to go and switch off my burglar alarm. Somebody set it off by mistake. Oops, it's just stopped. But in addition to decarbonizing the electricity system and electrifying as much of the economy as possible, we realized several years ago that we have to think about how to deal with what we've called the hard to abate sectors of the economy, such as heavy industry, cement, chemicals, steel, and long distance transport, such as aviation and shipping. And in a report 2 years ago called Mission Possible, we described how it was possible to get even those to zero carbon by 2050. Within the mix of technologies that we will use to get there is hydrogen. And we at the global level of the Energy Transition Commission see an enormous role for hydrogen within the next 30 years. We see potential global production of hydrogen going from 60 million tons to as much as 600 million tons, or even higher if hydrogen is used as a storage device within the grid system. So we see this as absolutely important. And the good news is that the global trend is now for a fall in the price of producing green electricity, equivalent to the remarkable falls that we've seen in the price, green hydrogen, equivalent to the remarkable falls that we've seen in the price of producing renewable electricity and batteries. We are seeing evidence from around the world that whereas electrolyzers today brought in small quantities might cost $850 per kilowatt, they are now becoming available at below $300 a kilowatt and will probably go down to $200 and then to about $100 by 2050. And throughout the world, that is then producing this focus on getting the cost of green hydrogen down, with this interesting benchmark of $2 per kilogram as being the stage at which it really does begin to outcompete not only what is called blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen produced from SMR, steam methane reforming plus CCS, but in many places in the world where the gas price is a bit higher, will make it fully competitive with just straightforward grey hydrogen from a steam methane reforming process. And I think it's interesting that just a few years ago, if you'd said green hydrogen from electrolysis at $2 per kilogram, people will have thought you were a crazy optimist. But now people are beginning to think that we could get there well before 2030 or be lower still. And I was very interested to see in Thomas's slide for Gujarat, it was talking at a price of 1.78 in Gujarat by 2030. And we are seeing similar ambitions in Australia, in China, in Europe, etc. So basically, we are entering an area of optimism about the role of hydrogen across the world. But there are still complicated issues to address. One of it is the issue of what we call the chicken and the egg. We can get down the price of green hydrogen if there are large enough volumes to achieve economies of scale in electrolyzer production. But that will only occur if there are large amounts of demand for green hydrogen. But that will only occur if the costs are low enough. And that is a classic situation in which there is a role for governments to just help make that virtuous cycle get going. Support the initial stages of the development that get the industry to the scale and the learning curve effects where the costs come down, and then it becomes self-fulfilling. We've seen that cycle work so powerfully, in particular in India, in the solar PV and wind area. And Dr. Kumar talked earlier about the remarkably low prices we are hearing for solar in India now, 2 rupees per kilowatt hour for just generation, and 3.8 rupees per, no, 2.7 rupees, I think it was, for round the clock. A renewable provision. So we need to crack the chicken and egg, and we also need to address this issue at a local level. Because while you can set out some general themes of the development of a green electrolysis and green hydrogen at global level, to really work it out, you have to dive down to local level. The economics vary with the gas price. If you were sitting in Russia or in Qatar, you might think there is a greater opportunity for blue hydrogen because the gas price, which is your input, is so incredibly low. That is different in India and China, where the economics clearly focus green electrolysis hydrogen rather than blue from SMR plus CCS. So you have to go local to understand the relative economics. But you also have to go even more local to understand how we are going to get this process going in industrial clusters. Are we going to produce hydrogen centrally and move it large distance, either in trucks or pipes? Or are we going to do it in industrial clusters where your electrolyzers are placed close to your Haber-Bosch ammonia processes or your refinery with only short distance piping? Thinking that through is really important, and that is why in our work both in India and globally we are getting down to the granularity of individual industrial clusters. And it is also important, finally, to see the hydrogen economy not just as something absolutely important to drive the decarbonization of our economies and zero carbon, but a hugely important opportunity for value added and new business and new employment. And that is also a focus of this report for India. Dr. Kumar said that hydrogen could be the next big sunrise industry for India. And I'm sure that will be the case. He also said that if anything, he thought there will be more opportunities even than this report suggests. And I have well learned over the last few years that whenever I'm dealing with the lead authors of this report, with Thomas and Will and the other team at TERI, they are very cautious people. They always get their facts right, and they don't want to put their necks out and be too optimistic. So if anything, there's probably a still bias to caution, and Dr. Kumar is probably right that the opportunities are bigger even than set out in this report. So it's a great pleasure to be with you for this launch of report and for the launch of what I do believe will be a major sunrise industry for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adair. As always, very clear, very articulate. And I think the point about the fact that this would follow the trend of we have seen in other industries where change has actually happened faster than any of us had anticipated. I think this is going to be a characteristic of this area as well. I keep my fingers crossed. With that, let me thank both Dr. Rajiv Kumar and Lord Adair Turner for launching the report and for sharing their initial thoughts with us. We thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks a lot. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks. We now move into a discussion on, well, what does this mean? And we have various speakers with us from the industry. We have Mr. Panda from NTPC. We have Jared Ruser from Siemens India, Saurabh Kundu from Tata Steel, Timur Gul, who heads the Energy Technology Policy Division at the International Energy Agency, and Richard Bucock, who is here in his role as representing the US-India Hydrogen Task Force. For this session, let me hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Girish Sethi, to move the discussion ahead. Girish, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. I'm just trying to switch on my video. You can see me. Okay, good. Thank you.
We could see us. Now we can see you.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Mathur, for the introduction. And let me now start with the panel discussion. We, as Dr. Mathur mentioned, we have a fairly a diversified panel from the corporate sector, starting with NTPC, one of the largest power sector companies in the country, in India. Then we have Siemens, Mr. Dusner, and Dr. Kundu from Tata Steel, one of the biggest steel producers from India, and one of the oldest steel producers, let me also say this. And of course, from IEA, Mr. Timur Gul, as well as Mr. Richard Bocock from the Air Products. We have, I think, close to around 25 minutes or so, or half an hour at the most, for this panel discussion. So I'll request quickly Mr. Panda, DMR Panda, the general manager, who is looking after the hydrogen business at NTPC Limited, to share his initial thoughts on the overall presentation, which my colleague Thomas had made earlier. But also maybe, Mr. Panda, if you could also like to elaborate briefly on the NTPC's plans, as because it is one of the largest companies and you have been one of the first movers in taking interest in this subject. So what is it that really drives NTPC in this whole business of the hydrogen in India? Over to you, Mr. Panda. Mr. Panda, can you hear me? I think you are muted.
No, so there is some minor glitch. Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Now, when I looked at the slides in the beginning, I'll start from there. Now, I was struck on this point that we need to invest on R&D. Very fair point, no doubt about that. But then the world has reached at a certain level. Now, so we must decide, say for India, what we need to buy, what we need to make, and what we need to develop. So where I should put my money, I should not do something which has already been proved and is in practice. So I need to look for something where I can be of use to this hydrogen community and for India. So that's the first point. And then in all these presentations in the economy, one point is very conspicuously absent. Supposing at any location, say in Delhi or say Pune or Noida, if the so-called diesel economy or carbon economy is getting replaced by hydrogen economy, how does this socio-economic thing is going to change? How does it affect the employability of the common man on the road? And if I can anticipate few things, then probably what was happening 30 years back when computerization started in banking industry, those things won't be there, and this should be a fairly smooth progression that we need to do. In fact, in NTPC, we are looking for some information on this. If similar activities, similar studies have been done by other countries, those are not there. So probably this is the right time. And thanks for your words, kind words, that NTPC has been the first mover. So maybe that responsibility lies with us, that we need to do something in this study. And we'll deal more on this. And then your question about what NTPC is doing. NTPC is trying to support our Prime Minister's vision of decarbonizing Ladakh. So we're starting with running FCV buses, cars there, which will be based on purely green hydrogen. Number one, we're trying to do some hydrogen injection into the gas pipeline. We are meeting our other partners, colleagues in other sectors, how to go about that. And then we are now in this area, we have not started anything. Say space heating. If you want to do at Ladakh, so considerable carbon is emitted either by because of use of kerosene or diesel or firewood. How we can support them? For hydrogen in form of space heating and cooking. There are various studies going on, so this is one of them. This is the focus. And how to have local microgrids in and around Ladakh where it is very expensive or virtually impossible to have the grid line extended to that side with help of hydrogen. So this is what we're trying. And this is just very few key steps of our priced for hydrogen economy. So right now, this is what I would like to mention.
Thank you, Mr. Panda. I think it is nice to know that NTPC has been the front runner, as I mentioned, and you rightly acknowledged. And the fact that I think NTPC is actually taking the lead in the vision which the Prime Minister of India has in terms of decarbonizing the Ladakh region. And we have also heard about the plans which you have. I think Mr. Rajiv Kumar was also mentioning, I think, about the long distance buses between Delhi and Jaipur and a couple of other places which you plan to launch. And I also understand, I think there are many other cities which are also thinking about this long distance bus transport on hydrogen. So thanks, Mr. Panda, for your views. May I now request Mr. Thank you. I would like to now move to Mr. Gard User, the CEO of Siemens India. I think Siemens probably does not need any introduction. So over to you, Mr. User, for giving your views overall on the broader presentation which Thomas made, and also the international view from your perspective, if you wish to, on hydrogen in India.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm actually being here in India, and we are a global, let's say, technology company, I would say. Interesting point I want to make is hydrogen is there, technology is there since ever. It is just now that in the environment of the decarbonization and of the application of the respective technologies that it comes, to light. And I would say when I look at the global developments, there is really a hype, and hydrogen is maybe called as the new gold, same as data maybe. And what we are observing is that in order to talk or contribute to the climate, in order to reduce the global warming, hydrogen can replace a lot of topics. And we talked about costs and all this, and that is, of course, driving the whole topic. Let me start a little bit from the global perspective, and then talk also a little bit about India. So globally, when you talk about where is CO2 getting emitted, it's getting emitted in power generation, it's getting emitted in mobility, and it's getting emitted in the industry. And looking at hydrogen, it has an application in all those three elements. On the power generation side, I think that is the last area to look at. Industry is what we believe is right now coming up. Hydrogen as part of the fertilizer industry, hydrogen as part of the petrochemical industry is coming up. And on the mobility side, hydrogen is also coming up for blending of fuel, and hydrogen is coming up in the fuel cell industry. And we see those developments worldwide happening, and we support them, of course. What we also see is globally a couple of countries or areas in the world which are not able to produce enough hydrogen, and other countries or other areas in the world which have a vast potential for hydrogen. And that might be the case because there is vast sun or wind, or there is some better economics in terms of producing it. So there's a kind of, I would call it a hydrogen race going on, and different large, alliances have been done. And we said it earlier, alliances are needed. So this is an element which is very interesting to see. Now, when I come to India, I believe India has all the elements it takes to be successful and to, first of all, contribute to India, and then potentially, the second step, also contribute to the world. And what I mean with that is, and we said it also earlier, the price of the electricity came down, of the green electricity. And then by localizing the electrolyzer and the elements which we need to make the produce the hydrogen, the production cost can also come down. And that comes to the conclusion that we can reach a very, let's say, competitive price. And I think, as Adair said, the chicken and egg topic is there. And if the government helps a little bit to give some sparks, how I call it, then I think we can, in India, be a front runner, as we are on the COP21 agreement, where we are saying that we are adding up to 450 gigawatt renewables. We can do the same when it comes to hydrogen production and hydrogen application. So I like to pause here, and maybe there are also questions, but I really believe that the application of hydrogen is a prime area which we can develop in India. And with the little sparks from the government, I think we would very well be placed and develop it with the right economics as well. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Duftar. I think you are absolutely right. I think that in case of India, I think one probably needs that small push and see that, yes, we will be able to really get into this hydrogen economy very fast. And luckily, both Niti Aayog as well as the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, as well as a couple of other ministries at the central government level, have been very, very positive in trying to see that India really moves fast in this hydrogen economy area. I know I was in the meeting earlier in the morning today. I think the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy also is trying to come out with a mission document very soon, and Secretary MNRE was present in that meeting. So I'm really sure that, yes, India will be moving fast. And as Adair said, that we at TERI have been a bit more cautious. We'll talk about a 5-fold increase by 2050, but maybe it is 6 or 7-fold. And Adair, I think if you are around, let me also mention that I think some of the sectors which we have not considered in this report are the big ones. The petrochemical, which we have not covered at all in this report, and also the shipping, which you had pointed out by reviewing this report. So definitely, I guess it will be more than 5-fold what we have projected. Let me now turn over to Dr. Saurabh Kundu. He's the Chief Process Research at Tata Steel, as I mentioned in the introduction, one of the most important private sector companies in India in the steel sector. And if you look at the report, I think which Dr. Kundu you might see, we have actually concluded in this report that the biggest driver for hydrogen in India over the next 30 years will actually be steel sector, because we barely uses any hydrogen today, but we believe that that will be the big driver, and with that will come in many other sectors which will start using hydrogen. So over to you, Dr. Kundu, for your views overall on the steel sector, and if you want to specifically touch on the plans for Tata Steel as well.
Yeah.
Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Girish. Like to thank TERI for this opportunity. So, I'll touch upon a few points. So why is hydrogen important for steel industry? So it is actually becoming very, very important and going to become very important in the next few decades, because hydrogen is not only a very high energy density, having a very high energy density in it, but it is also a very good reducing agent. So we can easily replace coke for making iron with this. And that actually gives us the direct carbon reduction. But it does not end there. I mean, it is really something else. Hydrogen as a chemical can also be used in CCU, that is carbon capture and utilization. So carbon capture technologies, as you know, is available. The amine-based technologies are available. And if hydrogen is also available, which is blue to green, at a price that we are talking about today, then it is possible to make different hydrocarbons, which will actually help us in sequestrate CO2 in a big way. Now, for steel industry, the specific requirement of hydrogen has its own beauty. So here, the hydrogen that you require is not required to be very, very pure. For instance, the purity that you get from electrolyzers are not required. We can actually deal with much inferior quality, if you call it inferior. I'm sorry to mention that word, but it is okay to have carbon monoxide, to some extent in this mixture. And that will be actually working as well as the pure hydrogen. However, there is a big point that the requirement volume is extremely, extremely high. So we have done a calculation here in Tata Steel. Let us say that if there is a steel company in 2050 which is producing around 80 million tons of steel, it would require about 600 tons of hydrogen per hour to come to net zero. So that is the volume that you're talking about, and that is why in Tata Steel the way we are trying to work is to address that volume. So for us, we are thinking about the strategies where the hydrogen is local. That was discussed whether hydrogen can be transported, etc. But that much of hydrogen by 2050 cannot be transported as we think. So hydrogen for us has to be local. And apart from the electrolyzers, of course, electrolyzers is there. It's a very good technology. It's established. But we also have to look for biomass gasifications. And we have to look for another technology which we are working on with Ohio State University is carbon looping combustions. So what is this? Here we are talking about gas to be used for hydrogen generation. We are talking about using blast furnace gases, for instance, or coke oven gases to make use of those for hydrogen production. And I'll tell you the calculation again that you have done, or the pilot that you have done. It shows us that in this case, the hydrogen price can come down to less than $1 per kg. But it is not green. It is still not green. The emission will be about 6 to 7 kg of CO2 per kg of hydrogen that you produce. Remember, the SMR is about 12 kg. And if we use electrolyzers, taking electricity from the grid, which is not green, I mean to say, then the emission is much higher. So we are looking for a technology. We are looking for different technologies, and we believe no one technology will be sufficient to supply such a big amount of hydrogen to steel industries. So biomass, the CLC or the carbon looping combustion, and of course electrolyzers are there in our mind. We already have a pilot for carbon capture. We are now going for a pilot for a special gasification unit. And we are also going to go for a pilot for a CLC. So that is what is our plan in the next 2 to 3 years time. And I think we are already discussing some changes and some kind of the government policies will really help us, because these investments are going to be risky and these investments are going to be very large. So we look forward to that. But we from steel industry, particularly from Tata Steel, believe that hydrogen is the future. And we are actually having a big team in Tata Steel, and we're going to work towards that very, very closely in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kundu. I think for letting us know of the route which Tata Steel is looking at, and good to hear that hydrogen is actually being seen as one of the most promising options for you as you move forward. And you talked about not just electrolysis, you also talked about the biomass gasification and the new technology on CLC, which you mentioned. We'll like to learn more from you as we move ahead. In fact, I think we at TERI have interacted quite a lot with Tata Steel over the last few months, as we initially also launched we developed a consultation report on the steel sector, and we worked with you. Thanks once again, Dr. Kundu. May I now move to Mr. Timur Gyul, the head of the Energy Technology Policy Division from the International Energy Agency. Thank you, Mr. Gyul, for joining. We would really like to thank IEA for their continuous support. I think TERI and IEA have been having a very good relationship for the last so many years. And I think you and some of your colleagues have also contributed in terms of reviewing this. And I know IEA did come out with their own hydrogen report very recently. So over to you, sir, for your comments and any views which you may have internationally as well on this subject.
Yeah, many thanks, Girish. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Great pleasure for me to be here with you today. And let me first of all congratulate all of our colleagues and friends from TERI for embarking on this study to explore the potential role for hydrogen in India. Thanks to Thomas for his excellent presentation, Will himself, Will, the entire team for the excellent work and what I would call an analytical, cool-headed approach towards the opportunity space for hydrogen in India, which I think is a very important way of approaching a topic that is indeed very timely and is enjoying enormous attention, as Thomas mentioned in his presentation, all around the world. I think you can capture that attention quite easily if you're looking at a couple of key numbers. First, when you look at governments and the sheer amount of governments that are currently developing their national hydrogen strategy, then you can see that since early 2019, 8 governments and the European Commission set out their ambitious national hydrogen strategies or roadmaps. We have records of at least another 7 that are currently underway to release such hydrogen strategies. So there's a lot of momentum in this space. That's from the government side of things, and from the investment side of things, there is certainly growing activity. Over the last 2 years, more than 50 megawatt of electrolyzers were installed, boosting the global capacity to, according to our numbers, now 185 megawatt worldwide. Still very far from the opportunity space, of course, but certainly growing momentum. And we're also seeing just this year 2 large projects to produce hydrogen from natural gas with CCS to become operational in Canada. So a lot of momentum on the supply side of things, and also a growing number of activities underway to boost the use of hydrogen in different new applications, away from the current applications towards new ones in iron and steel making, hydrogen fuel cell cars, hydrogen fuel cell trucks, power generation. So many activities going on in that space. I would like to echo those couple of statements that have been mentioned by colleagues before. First, hydrogen is known in the energy sector, and as a potential solution to address our challenges that we are facing is not new towards the discussion of the energy sector. There have been periods of strong momentum for hydrogen in the past, and I think what concerns energy planning, environmental planning, it is important to understand if and how this period for hydrogen can be different. I think there's a lot of reason to believe so. Probably the most important one is the fact that many governments around the world are setting out for developing their long-term climate ambitions to reach net zero emissions over the next coming decade, which will require technology solutions across the entire energy sector, away from just power generation, from passenger transport only, but towards the entire suite of energy-related CO2 emissions. But it's important to keep in mind that we are not looking here to build up a hydrogen economy, but we are looking to build up a decarbonized energy sector to which hydrogen can and must be an important contributor moving forward. Hydrogen, of course, can help to diversify the energy mix, which is important for countries that rely on the import of fossil fuels, for example. So I very much appreciate and very much welcome the close look that TERI is taking with this study at hydrogen and as an opportunity for hydrogen for India to decarbonize. I would like to emphasize, and you mentioned that, Girish, that we have put out a report called The Future of Hydrogen last year, a landmark report that we released at the request of G20, looking at hydrogen at a global scale. And so I very much appreciate that the study that has been put out somewhat picks up on some of the findings, our recommendations towards the national domestic context, thinking about the suggested focus on industrial clusters here, the potential role of hydrogen for long-distance transport, while not ignoring, of course, the importance of electrification for different modes of transport. So making analytical choices towards what's best for various different purposes, and also the strong dual cost declines that we can expect for renewable hydrogen. On the one hand, from the falling costs of renewables, and on the other hand, from the rapidly declining cost of electrolyzers. For India, I think it is important to remember that India has a significant latent demand for energy moving. If you look at a couple of key numbers, if you look at a couple of keywords compared to the world average, you can see this very clearly. India's electricity has made great strides on electricity access, of course. Very important progress here, but electricity consumption per capita is still around 1/3 of the world average. And so addressing rising conventional electricity demand that we can expect, while at the same time catering new uses, including potentially to produce renewable hydrogen, will be an important consideration moving forward. The number of passenger cars per 1,000 inhabitants is still under 20% of the world average. And although hydrogen is already India is already the second largest steel producer in the world, according to our projections, it will double steel output within the next 10 years and quadruple it by the year 2050 in order to cater domestic and international demand. To meet this demand in a sustainable way in the near term, it will be very important for India to deal with three challenges simultaneously. That is, making energy available in an affordable type of way so that all citizens and the economy can enjoy the benefits that energy brings to our daily lives. Energy is not the problem. The problem is with the emissions, of course, that come with energy production and use. Making energy available in a secure type of way and making energy available in an environmental sustainably way, addressing both climate change and air pollution at the same time, will be important challenges moving forward. And hydrogen can make strong contributions to these challenges in the long run, also with a view to the industrial opportunities that have been highlighted and that could unfold out of the hydrogen technology opportunity space. But India has many choices and challenges ahead of it in the near term, which will require a close look at all clean energy technology opportunities to see what's most effective for the context of India. So in conclusion, I would like to say that I'm very, very happy and very pleased with the strong attention that hydrogen enjoys in India. And with this particular study, again, sincere congratulations to our colleagues at TERI. We at IEA will keep monitoring hydrogen progress, of course. We'll release a new report next year entitled provisionally the Global Hydrogen Review, where we want to look a bit behind the curtains of the strong momentum. It's one thing to have long-term plans, significant stated goals, but it's another thing, of course, to put the right policies in place, to put investments into action in order to bolster this momentum towards the stated goals. We will also collaborate with Japan on hosting the next year's Hydrogen Energy Ministerial, which is an important outlet where global hydrogen leaders and ministers convene to discuss the prospects of hydrogen and put actually real policy action into place. India, of course, for us at IEA is a key member of our IEA family, and we look forward to working with TERI, with all our other colleagues in India, to accelerate its clean energy transition in India in an affordable and secure manner across all fuels and technologies, including hydrogen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Timurgul, for your words. I think we at TERI also always look forward to working very closely with IEA, and we'll keep in touch with you. Thanks once again. Now I turn over to Mr. Richard Bucock. He's the Senior Vice President and Special Advisor to the chairman at Air Products, but he is also representing this panel today in his capacity as a representative of the US-India Hydrogen Task Force. So over to you, Mr. Bucock, for your views, not just from the perspective of Air Products, but also I think what do you really have in terms of the US-India Hydrogen Task Force towards contributing towards this expanding the ambition of hydrogen in India. Over to you.
Thank you, Girish, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, if there are people listening in the Far East. My name is Richard Bucock, Senior Vice President of Air Products, and also, as Girish, you mentioned, also representing the US-India Hydrogen Task Force. The Hydrogen Task Force is a public-private partnership that has only very recently been formed between the United States and India to help scale up technologies to produce hydrogen from renewable energy and fossil fuel sources, bring down the cost of deployment for enhanced energy security and resiliency. The United States has a very long history in hydrogen, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But yes, very proud to be part of that. This task force has only very recently been formed, and in fact, there was a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, signed between the Secretary Dan Briette and the Honourable Minister Pradhan just a little while ago to really set the scene and make a start for that task force. The intention is going to be to bring US capabilities and India capabilities together to really help to chart that future. First of all, let me express my appreciation to TERI and the organizing team for putting this event together, and really sincere congratulations on the launch of the paper. A lot of very good information was shown in the presentation, and I look forward to studying the document itself in great detail. The topics that are covered are what I call a crucial conversation in the energy space, very closely aligned to Air Products' higher purpose of applying technology and innovation to truly make the world a better place. Air Products is a leading industrial gases company. We've been around for 80 years or so, and every day 20,000 of our team members go to work to make the world a better, safer place, supporting our customers in making things more productive, healthier, cleaner, and more sustainable than they otherwise would be. Air Products has been in the business of hydrogen production since 1950s. And again, this is where we link back to the very strong history in the United States when we developed technology and processes for industrial production of hydrogen and liquid hydrogen in part to support NASA space programs. And we've supported a very wide range of programs all the way through to the present day. In addition, we as the world's biggest producer of on-purpose hydrogen, we operate technologies from electrolyzers that we've done for many years through SMRs, through gasification, producing over 2 billion cubic feet a day. We have 1,000 kilometers of hydrogen pipelines, numerous liquid hydrogen plants, distribution systems, and fueling systems for hydrogen vehicles, where we do about 1 million fills per year. Most recently, we announced in conjunction with our partners an investment of around $7 billion in the city of Neom in Saudi Arabia to take renewable energy and convert it to green ammonia as a conveyor of green hydrogen. This one plant, when complete, will fuel zero-emission vehicles and eliminate the emissions of the equivalent of over 700,000 cars. It really, what I look to as part of the US-India Hydrogen Task Force and as Air Products work in India, it's really through technology and innovation and skills of systems integration that we will be able to move the pointer in terms of making hydrogen a part of the energy platform going forward. We fully support the assessment that hydrogen is not going to be the only solution. It is part of the solution, but it can play a very important part. Adopting energy strategies and putting a policy framework in place that are right for the locality, as Lord Adair Turner highlighted in his comments. We need to exploit the work that is done by other countries, so we should question whether we should be doing demonstration projects or pilot projects, or actually taking advantage of work that has already been done and moving to commercialization. And it will take adjustments on both the supply side and the demand side, with some incentives and maybe some subsidies and maybe some penalties to shape the future going forward. So in conclusion, it's going to take some courage to take on this challenge, but I think the US-India Hydrogen Task Force and Air Products are very, very keen to be part of that. It takes some courage to start this conversation, so congratulations to TERI again in terms of hosting this event, and congratulations on the issuing of the document. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I think it was nice to see you after a long time. I think we did meet once 1 year back here at TERI when you visited. We look forward to remaining in touch with you over the next few months. With this, I think I'm afraid we will not really have time to answer the lots of questions which we have actually got on the chat box. We are already at 5:30 Indian time. And what we would actually do is that since we know who all have asked these questions, we'll try to answer these, and maybe on a one-to-one basis through an email, we'll try to respond to these. I would also like to mention that some of you have asked in the chat box that whether this presentation or the report would be available. Yes, we'll be putting up this presentation on the TERI website as well as the WSDS website. Also, we'll be putting up the entire report on our TERI, ETC, and WSDS websites in a day or two, and it will be freely downloadable, and we'll be happy to answer to any questions or queries which all of you might have. Thanks everybody, to all the panelists. Over to you, Dr. Mathur, I think, for any last words from your side.
Well, the last words are obviously words of thanks. And I'm sorry we did not have time for questions and answers, but may I suggest that what we can do is put them together, actually answer them on a one-to-one basis, and also let us try to see if we can create that as a thread which we share with everybody who is here today. I would like us to create a community that is working towards change, towards building hydrogen into our economy. I think all the panelists and the speakers before them and Thomas himself highlighted that this is not an easy process. Where do you decide to intervene? What are the kinds of interventions that would make sense both economically and technologically are issues that we will have to continue to discuss. But we are delighted that this has engendered a discussion. So many, many thanks to everyone. Obviously to Dr. Rajiv Kumar and to Lord Adair Turner, but also to our panelists, all of them, and as well as to all the participants. I cannot express how delighted I am that this has got so much interest. I am looking at messages which are capturing the fact that a discussion on hydrogen was long overdue. And I think with the Niti Aayog and the Government of India push on the one side and your interest on the other side, we do have the chance to make hydrogen a part of our economy, something that we've been trying for a very, very long time. But now I believe that because of that golden triangle that Thomas talked about, demand, supply, and policies, we have a chance of making it work. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, Panda. Bye, Jed, if you're still there. And Saurabh Kundu, many thanks. And obviously to all friends, I'm just looking at who's still on, who hasn't gone off. To all friends, many, many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for initiating all that. I mean, it's really a pleasure. And I think it's the right thing at the right time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Timur, wonderful to have you with us.